to social networks, people from all walks of life have managed to gather millions of followers. What they say and what they do is tweeted, shared and uploaded 24/7, gaining worldwide reach. But long before the internet existed, there were people who changed and influenced individuals, the masses, science, governments, and even the course of humanity. Their messages and deeds went viral without the need for hashtags, memes, or posts.
So that's what makes them extraordinary. It's not that they're telling stories, it's that they're being an extraordinary story.
But what was it about these people and their lives, work, and achievements that they, without the social platforms we take for granted today, became history's ultimate influencers? Social leaders and activists today take advantage of the enormous reach of digital platforms to globally leverage their influence with the intention of improving the lives of millions of people around the world. However, in the 20th century, before social media, three prominent figures in the struggle for human rights changed history by making the most of the platforms they had to spread their message.
There's a few fundamental things that great leaders do that inspire people to follow them. And one of those things is by communicating with them in ways that are emotional and visceral and inspire them to feel something, to want to do something.
In this episode, we'll discover how the noble actions, magnetic personalities, and innovative strategies of Nelson Mandela, Lady Diana, and Martin Luther King Jr. made them universal icons of activism and humanitarian work, establishing themselves as true influencers of social change. Nelson Mandela was a visionary man who dedicated his life to dismantling the racism that oppressed the majority of South Africans, bringing the injustices of apartheid to the world's attention. But how did he go from rural kid to universal symbol of freedom?
He was a great leader. Part of his popularity and his influence was because his vision was one that everybody in South Africa could potentially see themselves as part of.
On the 18th of July, 1918, Holishaza Mandela came into the world as the son of a tribal chief from Umvezo, a rural village in South Africa's Eastern Cape. He enjoyed a typical rural childhood in Africa, passing his time with games, agricultural work, and village customs. Once at school, he's given the English name Nelson, a custom as British colonials could not easily, and often would not, pronounce African names. From an early age, he was interested in social struggles and political activities, and has an ambition to become a lawyer. He attends Fort Hare University to study law, but gets suspended for participating in a student protest. Settling in Johannesburg, Mandela befriends like-minded activists, and his interest in politics continues to grow. In 1944, Mandela helped establish the Youth League of the African National Congress. The ANC, as it was also known, was an organisation that fought for black rights in South Africa.
This Youth League was really to demonstrate two things. One, was that he wanted to bring about a new way of thinking about sort of the approach to apartheid. The second really was to galvanize the youth and to really think about how youth could protest, could do things differently than their older counterparts.
1948 is the year that changes the country's socio-political game. The National Party, formed by white South Africans of European descent, known as Afrikaners, win the election and establish the apartheid regime.
The word apartheid actually translates to aparthood, different neighborhoods. It was a system that segregated the blacks in South Africa and the whites in South Africa in their housing, in their work, in marriage, in every facet of human society.
You begin to see the rise and the increased agitation of Nelson Mandela against the system of apartheid.
With the National Party in power and racist policies oppressing the majority of the population, Mandela becomes even more determined and fights harder than ever. After the National Party rejects the claims for legitimate rights for blacks, in 1952, the ANC launches the Defiance Campaign, a non-violent resistance movement that defied established laws, with Mandela as its volunteer-in-chief. This starts positioning him as a known figure, as well as an individual threat to the government.
Nelson Mandela, along with his fellow colleagues, was one of the first people to actually lead some of the protests, but also was one of the first to be arrested. And as a result, he became very well known as one of these youth leaders and organizers.
More than 8,500 supporters joined the campaign. For the first time, Africans and Indians, who are still discriminated against in the country, along with some white citizens, came together in political action, galvanized by the leadership of this brave man. At the end of 1956, he's arrested in a national police raid, which would lead to a 5-year judicial process known as the treason trial, widely covered by the international media, awakening the world against the injustice of apartheid. He's released on bail 2 weeks later, and in 1961, fearful of being arrested again, Mandela goes underground.
He was a master at thinking about media and how to use media, particularly as you think about protest movements and social movements.
From his hideout, he gives a critical TV interview to British television news, seeking the support of the international media.
The Africans want the franchise on the basis of one man, one vote. They want political independence. We have made it very clear in our policy that there is room for all the various races in this country.
This interview went on to become the most important televised declaration he'd make for the following 3 decades. During this time, his words would eventually travel around the world. In recent years, we've seen protests and revolutions spark change through the use of social media.
We want all the power to the people.
Between 2010 and 2013, social networks played a significant role in communication and interaction between protesters during the Arab Spring, a series of uprisings which would end by bringing down several authoritarian governments in the Middle East and North Africa. But Mandela has none of this at his disposal. So, to gain worldwide attention, he takes a big gamble. At the beginning of 1962, he leaves the country under false identity and travels through Africa, searching for support and expanding his geographical reach. He also goes to London, where he meets with key politicians and journalists who amplify the core messages of the anti-apartheid crusade. He returns to South Africa and is arrested for illegally leaving the country, ending up in court once again. However, this time, his trial would receive global attention and is widely covered by the national and international media. Although the country's white-dominated channels evidently favor his prosecution, the foreign media widely support his liberation. Mandela knows that he has a platform now to spread his message, not only to fellow South Africans, but to the rest of the world. During this trial, he gives the famous speech from the bench, sharing his ideal of a free, democratic and united South Africa. Mandela states, "During my lifetime, I've dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I fought against white domination, and I fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities."
He ends his speech by saying that he is willing to die for this cause. It puts him in the center of the stage because at this moment, no one had actually said these kinds of words, and certainly had not said them from a courtroom.
Mandela's 3-hour-long public speech sparks global attention. World scrutiny focuses on South Africa and its oppressive regime, and as a result, the United Nations appeal against the expected death sentence, and influential global institutions like FIFA ban South Africa's participation in their competitions. #FreeMandela would have ignited all digital platforms today, gaining millions of followers and causing a global uproar. But Mandela's cause back then still managed to travel around the world and gain a lot of support outside South Africa. International pressure paid off, and no one is sentenced to death in the trial. Nevertheless, despite Mandela's undeniable popularity, or maybe precisely because of it, he's sentenced to life imprisonment. But this doesn't stop him from carrying his fight from jail, bringing new communication tactics into the game.
He wrote letters from prison and continued to advocate for a free and equal South Africa, even from prison. He had emissaries on the outside of prison that would go and share that message.
He is the symbol of resistance. He is a symbol of the African National Congress. He is the symbol of the hope of this country.
Very importantly, tried to bring in the attention of media from outside South Africa to bring light into what was happening. Indeed, the whole world became involved with supporting the anti-apartheid movement.
The Free Nelson Mandela campaign creates worldwide buzz, becoming a viral phenomenon without the help of hashtags or retweets.
And that campaign was a global campaign, really galvanizing the global world to think about a prison system, but also the system of apartheid.
In 1985, after more than 2 decades in jail, Mandela finally starts negotiations with the government, convinced that the end of apartheid is near. He never stopped fighting and always stayed hopeful throughout all his years of imprisonment.
It was important for them to gain support from people in power, predominantly white people. They always talked about not just how the world needs to be made right for those that are being oppressed or those that are being disenfranchised, but what is the role of white people in the future society?
World pressure to free Mandela and end apartheid keeps growing, with the imposition of political and economic sanctions, leaving the white government increasingly isolated.
There was a lot of activism on college campuses among individuals and legislators, musicians, people all across the country, all across the globe were working to get not only the federal government, but corporations and even universities to divest in South Africa so that American money wouldn't be used to basically fund or to help uplift financially this system that was so racist.
In 1988, dozens of the world's most influential artists joined the Freedom Fest, a massive concert at Wembley Stadium to pay tribute to Mandela on his 70th birthday. The spectacular event was broadcast to 600 million people in 67 countries. The following month, over 250,000 of his supporters gathered in Hyde Park, London, to hear South African Anglican Bishop Desmond Tutu call for Mandela's liberation.
South Africa needs Nelson Mandela. The world needs Nelson Mandela.
In 1989, Frederick de Klerk is elected president, and finally, the door for dismantling racial segregation is opened. De Klerk is a progressive politician who, despite criticism from within his party, really takes the concern about racial segregation in his country very seriously. Mandela's work had finally managed to turn the tide, and hope starts to reign in South Africa. In 1990, after 27 years in prison, Mandela regains his freedom before the world's eyes.
When Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, that was huge. I mean, it was a global story. It was breaking news. It was something that really captured a lot of people's attention.
I must confess I'm unable to describe my emotions. I was completely overwhelmed by the enthusiasm. And along the route, I was surprised to see the number of whites who seem to identify themselves with what is happening in the country today amongst blacks.
So his release was a sign of, for many, a sign of hope, a sign of newness and things to come.
Despite being unjustly imprisoned and losing much of his life in a cell, when Mandela is released, the core of his message is reconciliation. He knows his country needs to be a home for everyone and constantly addresses the white population in his speeches. Because of this unifying message, he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993, along with de Klerk.
This is a moment where what is being recognized is racial reconciliation. This moment of coming together across what had been, of course, very difficult circumstances, colonial circumstances, and then, of course, the system of apartheid. So it was a symbol not just for South Africa, but a symbol for the world.
The Nobel Prize catapults Mandela's influence as he campaigns for presidency. In 1994, in the first election with black participation in the country's history, Mandela is appointed president with more than 60% of the votes.
Now is the time for celebration, for South Africans to join together to celebrate the birth of democracy.
As president of the first multi-ethnic government of the country, he always refused to respond to racism with racism.
Whites are fellow South Africans, and we want them to feel safe, and that we appreciate the contribution they have made towards the development of this country.
One of the things that I think Mandela did the best, in some ways, certainly coming out of such a horrific and brutal system of apartheid, was to forgive. That is not easy.
That's a true mark of a leader. You know, using his power and his platform to be able to do something for the entire public good.
On the 5th of December 2013, after 95 long, intense and fruitful years of life, he dies peacefully at his home in Johannesburg.
Nelson Mandela is an inspiration. I think he left us with a paradigm of hope and justice that is brought about through truth. And you can only have reconciliation through the hard journey of truth, which might lead us to a certain kind of freedom. And that, of course, is from the words of Mandela.
In vastly different circumstances, another activist went down in history as a figure who stood up for the marginalized. A princess who was loved by the people, and in return, she loved them back. But what was it about Lady Di that ignited her worldwide adoration?
Diana came across as potential Queen of England, but also someone who was an ordinary person, someone who was going through ordinary traumas with her husband, and making audiences identify with that.
On the 1st of July 1961, the Viscount and Viscountess of Althorpe welcomed their third daughter, Diana Frances Spencer. Living close to Sandringham, the Queen's summer residence, from her early years she rubs shoulders with royalty and seems to enjoy an idyllic childhood in the English countryside.
But that was on the surface. Beneath the surface, she had a deeply unhappy childhood. Her parents divorced when she was 6, and one of her most poignant memories was her sitting on the stone steps of Park House where they lived and watching as her mother walked out of her life, put her suitcases into a car and drove off. And that sense of abandonment defined her psychologically for the rest of her life.
Entering adolescence, her father is invested as the 8th Earl Spencer, and she receives the title that will accompany her forever, Lady Diana. When she was 14, the Spencers moved to Althorpe House in Northamptonshire, setting her destiny for both glory and tragedy.
Diana first met Prince Charles in a ploughed field at Althorpe House when Charles was dating her elder sister, Sarah. She was totally intimidated by Prince Charles, who was considerably older and wiser than she was.
Nothing serious came from the romance between the prince and elder Spencer. The Crown's heir was considered perhaps the most eligible bachelor in the world, searching for a wife. However, it would take a very special woman to take up the mantle of future queen.
He asked various women to marry him, and they all said no. They didn't want the scrutiny that comes with being the Princess of Wales. Diana Spencer was a lady, Lady Diana Spencer. She was a virgin, she was Anglo-Saxon, and she seemed to tick all the boxes.
I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was. And having great fun, and bouncy and full of life and everything. And I don't know what you thought of me.
Pretty amazing.
Later, they start going out, and after just 13 dates, the prince, now aged 32, proposes to Diana, 19, at the legendary Windsor Castle.
I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
Next to Prince Charles and I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
In July 1981, St. Paul's Cathedral becomes the setting for what the media would dub the wedding of the century. The royal wedding attracted an immense global audience.
The media coverage of the wedding of Charles and Diana was astronomical. Something like 800 million people around the world watched Diana say, "I do."
The world's cameras turned to Diana, initiating a media obsession.
She was in the media spotlight, and everyone was astonished at her popularity, including newspaper editors and magazine editors. They saw that as soon as a picture of Diana appeared on the cover of their newspapers, circulation would go up. And this didn't stop after the wedding.
Hundreds of thousands of women quickly view her as an icon of fashion and glamour.
The Queen, newspaper editors, Prince Charles, everyone thought that media coverage of Diana would subside. Diana herself really hoped that would be the case. But it wasn't. Every time she left Balmoral, she was followed and photographed.
Although the royals knew the importance of reaching out to citizens as a strategy to generate connection, for Diana, this closeness came naturally. The frequency and ease with which she interacted with people quickly separated her from the monarchy's typical rigidity.
Diana had the gift of empathy. She could connect with ordinary people in ways that many members of the royal family still fail to do.
Over the next few years, Diana becomes the mother of 2 boys, William and Harry. However, what initially seemed like a marriage from a fairy tale soon was tinted with conflict.
Her immense popularity really began to affect her relationship with Prince Charles. So Prince Charles became quite jealous of his wife, and it led to recriminations, it led to caustic comments, and as Diana said to him, I can't help this. It's not something I'm trying to promote.
Moreover, by then, the relationship between Charles and a former girlfriend, Camilla Parker Bowles, was well known in the royal corridors. The tabloids start exploiting the rumours about Charles and Diana's marital problems, and their readership lapped it up.
Celebrities are built up solely in order to be knocked down. So as soon as somebody was famous in the 20th century, the press would try and find dirt on that individual.
Today, that is never truer. With the advent of social media, it's not just the press who can knock down celebrities. Now, anyone with access to the internet can broadcast their negative opinions at the touch of a button. However, back in the late 80s, Diana wants to take more control of what's being said and shown about her.
Turning point in Diana's life, when it came to her really embracing difficult issues, was in 1987, when she visited an AIDS clinic in central London, and she shook the hands of men with AIDS at a time when it was believed that you could catch AIDS by shaking hands or by touch, which was a totally prejudicial idea. But for her, she felt it was a calling, and it had a really deep resonance, especially when she hugged and cuddled people who were on their last journey.
Already a highly profitable media product, Diana's humanitarian side begins to make headlines. Her flourishing activism makes her popularity grow even more. And as she gains confidence, Diana realizes she can use her image to promote important causes in the media.
She was seductive. She was attractive, and she used her attraction to get attention.
By that time, she also feels the need to let the public know the truth behind her image, hoping that the audience would sympathize with her. In June 1992, Diana, Her True Story is released. The biography, written by Andrew Morton with the secret collaboration of the princess, publicly exposed her troubled life.
I was totally flabbergasted when she spoke about her eating disorder, bulimia nervosa, her jealousy of her husband and his relationship with another man's wife, Camilla Parker Bowles. And at the time, Diana wanted to tell the truth about her life. She felt that she was a prisoner inside Kensington Palace. She felt that the public image was at total odds to the reality, and she wasn't prepared to live a lie for the rest of her life.
She could present as a woman who had experienced many ordinary women's pain. They had gone through what she was going through.
Her honesty and boldness make the bulk of the public take her side as she proves to be a clever communication strategist. She builds her confidence for her future relationship with the media.
Publication of Diana, Her True Story really changed people's view about the royal family and the monarchy generally. And it created, for the first time in a generation, a debate about the nature and the future of the royal family. And there was enormous sympathy for Diana and a lot of hostility for the royal family.
Amid the turmoil, in December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announces the couple's separation. 3 years later, Diana once again breaks the secrecy of the royal house and confirms what she'd told Morton in a controversial TV interview, stating her famous phrase, "There are three of us in this marriage, and that's a bit crowded."
And she became a kind of alternative role model to the women who had been abused in relationships by the males that they were living with, in a way that nobody else in British history, I think, has ever done. She was somebody from the untouchable class who were meant to keep quiet about private things that were disturbing, and she went on primetime television to talk about them. So she really had another empathetic link with ordinary people as a result of that.
23 million viewers in Britain witness her pain, and her words make headlines worldwide.
Yeah, I think she was a social media influencer in that she wasn't selling a product, she was selling herself as somebody who could be relied on to tell the truth.
Just a few weeks later, the Queen orders the couple to divorce. They separate definitively in August 1996. Freed from monarchical commitments, Diana focuses on her humanitarian work. By now, she manages her public profile with mastery and starts using her power over the media to make visible the causes she cares for.
And once she had joined the Red Cross, working to ban landmines around the world, and once she started work with lepers and AIDS victims, she really had defined herself as an independent humanitarian with a genuine and a sincere mission to help those who could not help themselves. At the same time, she was in control of her eating disorders, bulimia. She was not clinically depressed as she had been years before. She'd made sense of her life.
It's the 31st of August, 1997. Diana is in a new relationship with Egyptian tycoon Dodi Al-Fayed, which again has stirred the media. In Paris, traveling in a car at full speed to avoid the paparazzi that want exclusive pictures of the couple, they crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, with Al-Fayed dying on the spot. After a few hours, the People's Princess dies too. Her death causes popular commotion and expressions of collective mourning never seen before. During the following week, millions of people come to London to bid the princess farewell.
People were visibly moved in a way that you would expect them to be moved if their mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife died, but not a celebrity dying.
The official funeral is televised to 2.5 billion viewers, becoming one of the most important media events in contemporary British history. Among the 2,000 guests present at Westminster Abbey are names from royalty, British and US politics, and the fashion and entertainment world. People around the world showed sympathy for Diana. Her presence and departure is felt in a way that's completely new, even for a global personality.
Celebrities don't simply die in the public mind, they continue to live in various ways. They seem to have a completeness to them, a sense of wholeness to them, which is absent in people's lives, and that's why people are attracted to them.
Beyond her impact on ordinary citizens, Diana managed to humanize the way in which the royal family would behave in public. She also dared to open a discussion about issues that were not previously addressed in the public sphere.
One of the things which she really was pleased about was that thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of mainly women, went for help with eating disorders, and it made the stigma of having an eating disorder dissolve.
Her activism and humanitarian efforts also had political consequences, with the Ottawa Treaty entering into force and banning the use of landmines internationally soon after her death. It's no exaggeration to say that Diana dedicated her adult life to improving the lives of those who were suffering the most, which often meant sharing her spotlight to illuminate their causes. Other times, it meant comforting their pain by just being present, not as a princess, but as a human being.
And she embraced the fact that she was a living icon. She realized that she could do, with her wider personality, do good and make a change and make a difference.
On a different continent, a restless pastor was also considered a true change maker. His exceptional bravery and legendary speeches earned him an army of loyal followers who joined him in the movement to end racial segregation in the United States. But how did this man of humble beginnings end up having his life celebrated with his own national holiday?
Martin Luther King Jr. really became the recognized leader of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s in the United States. He started out as a Baptist preacher, went on to seminary. He was a great orator. He was a great writer and a great leader.
Michael King Jr. was born on the 15th of January, 1929, in Atlanta, into a religious middle-class family. After a visit to Germany, Michael's father was so inspired by the Protestant reformer Martin Luther that on his return changed both their names, and so, at 5 years old, he became Martin Luther King Jr. Martin receives his early education in Georgia's segregated public schools, where he already experiences racial prejudice.
The era in which King was born and reared was an era of extreme racial segregation. That was a time when educational and employment opportunities for Black people were basically abysmal because white supremacy was so strong and so deeply embedded into the laws of this country.
At the age of 15, he enters Morehouse College, following in the footsteps of his father and his maternal grandfather. Founded in 1867, the school's purpose was to educate newly freed male slaves to teach and become ministers. It's here that King's growing awareness of social and political issues starts to form.
It was really in theological school that his passion was ignited and his opportunity to give speeches and orate and affect other people was really known.
When pursuing a doctorate in Boston, he meets his future wife, Coretta Scott. Later, in 1954, he's appointed head pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama.
Because he was raised by a Baptist minister, became a Baptist preacher, you know, oratory, speeches were really one of his real fortes.
In 1955, an incident in his locality changes Martin's destiny forever.
On the 5th of December, a Negro woman was arrested, Mrs. Rosa Parks, for refusing to give up her seat for a boarding white male passenger. Pretty soon after she was arrested, the word got around the Montgomery community, and there was a spontaneous reaction.
The Montgomery bus boycotts were an attempt to address the system of Jim Crow. And the system of Jim Crow in the United States was a legal system of segregation that separated blacks and whites from using public facilities, restrooms, buses, water fountains.
King, confident and eloquent, starts to capture reporters' attention.
For several weeks now, we, the Negro citizens of Montgomery, have been involved in a non-violent protest against the injustices which we have experienced on the buses for a number of years. This is a non-violent protest. We are depending on moral and spiritual forces, using the method of passive resistance.
By being in Montgomery at the time that he was, when the boycott happened, made it be a perfect time for somebody like Martin Luther King Jr. to step to the front. It gave hope, it gave possibility.
The Negro citizens decided not to ride the buses until these conditions were changed. They asked me to serve as the spokesman and the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and from this time, I found myself in a leadership position in the civil rights struggle.
The boycott gains unexpected coverage in the local and national media in the US. However, It also whips up hatred for Dr. King, and in 1956, the leader's home is bombed, allegedly by white supremacists. Had it happened now, there's no doubt that the internet would have exploded with rage and indignation, as it did with George Floyd's murder by a police officer in 2020, when the hashtag #ICan'tBreathe caused global uproar. After 381 days of protests in Montgomery, the laws requiring segregation on buses are repealed. A year later, Dr. King and other activists found an important organization for the civil rights movement.
Martin Luther King was part of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a network of ministers. Leaders in the Black church were working quietly with leaders in white churches around these notions of equality and fair treatment and brotherhood. And that became a way to find allies in the white community.
By 1963, after years of bravely protesting for civil rights, Dr. King is used to being arrested. It's believed he was jailed around 29 times for acts of civil disobedience and trumped-up charges.
Doing things like even going to jail, that's a media-lit moment, right? It attracts media, it brings an attention, and then you're able to amplify the messages that you're trying to share.
After leading a campaign in Birmingham, Alabama, in a new attempt to condemn segregation in what King himself described as the most segregated city in the country, Martin ends up in jail once again. From there, he writes The Letter from Birmingham Jail, which would be printed by dozens of publications over the next months, and would become an iconic document about civil disobedience, reaching millions in the years to come. In it, Martin Luther King states, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed." By the mid-60s, Martin's influence as a national leader reaches its apex. He has undoubtedly captivated the media and takes advantage of the huge scope of television, a new invention that grew from a mere 17,000 sets in US homes in 1946 to nearly 20.5 million households just 7 years later.
Martin Luther King Jr. became very well aware of how important these television images and these video images would become. And so television becomes a vehicle to deliver messages.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a very savvy user of media. He really understood how the media operated, even down to the news cycle. He and his comrades often planned direct actions to happen before noon so that they would be able to be captured by the national news and be able to be broadcast on nightly news later in the evening.
In an effort to unite the many forces seeking change and to combat unfair working conditions among African Americans, in August 1963, King joins other social leaders in organizing a march on the epicenter of American politics.
This was one of the first massive displays of civil disobedience that we had in this country. And this happened in Washington, in the nation's capital. We had this multi-generational, multi-racial, huge thousands of people descend on the nation's capital to say enough is enough.
This march would become one of the most famous in all of history, as Dr. King delivered a speech in front of 250,000 people with words that still resonate today.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal.
Millions watched the speech on TV, which decades later is still considered a universal manifesto for equality. It's inspired one of the biggest social media campaigns in history, Black Lives Matter. Back in 2013, after the killer of an unarmed black teenager was found not guilty of murder, a Facebook post entitled Black Lives Matter captured the feeling among the community and sparked action, becoming viral worldwide in 2020 after the killing of a number of black people, including some at the hands of police. At the heart of this social campaign, indubitably, is a non-violent approach inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. Still today, his powerful delivery inspires admiration and even envy among many politicians and influential leaders.
Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was an amazing orator and an amazing writer, but it wasn't just the ability to put together a beautiful sentence or speak eloquently. It was the content of his thoughts, his vision for change in America. He created emotional connection with the audiences that he spoke to.
As expected, his tireless efforts and effective media tactics generate a strong effect on national opinion, resulting in the federal government passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That same year, at the age of 35, Martin Luther King Jr. becomes the youngest man ever to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. The following year, he led thousands of peaceful protesters during the Selma to Montgomery marches, demanding voting rights for black people, a massive walk that started in Selma, Alabama. But this march ended in brutality.
And those peaceful marches, those peaceful protests that were met with very violent acts of police aggression and state-based aggression were televised.
What King wanted people to see was the brutality of what was taking place. Dogs being released on black people, hoses, beatings. King wanted to highlight these abuses to bring a stop.
The struggles of these black protesters shake the nation, and are not in vain, as it leads to the passing of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which prohibits racial discrimination in voting. Despite the wins, the constant tension and repeated death threats begin to take their toll on Dr. King, who in 1968 admits to being exhausted.
Martin Luther King was an incredibly brave person. I mean, for the last number of years of his life, he knew that his life was in danger. He went into the front lines and risked his life to some degree, many days.
On the 4th of April, 1968, while standing on the balcony of a hotel room in Memphis, where he'd traveled to lead a new protest, Dr. King is killed by a sniper's bullet. The word spreads like wildfire through the media, sparking riots in more than 100 cities across the country. President Lyndon B. Johnson declares a national day of mourning, and a funeral is held at Ebenezer Baptist Church, where King had been a pastor for 8 years. More than 100,000 mourners accompany his casket through the streets of Atlanta.
What was really particularly unique about Martin Luther King's death at that time was how personally black people felt about this, because a lot of black folks felt like a relative had died.
The profound sentiment of loss brought about by his death goes beyond the black community. His important contributions soon position him as a universal archetype of leadership that keeps inspiring social transformation throughout the world.
His legacy is one not just of racial justice, but economic justice, justice for all. When we think about ethnic and racial discord, when we think about what's happening in terms of war today, when we think about what's happening in terms of LGBTQ+ communities globally, all of these are interconnected. And I think King's legacy asks us to think about how we can come together to address those interconnections.
He earned such significant recognition as having his own national holiday, which is still celebrated in the United States as a call for justice, freedom, and equality among all people.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at
last! A princess, a lawyer and a pastor who rose with admirable courage to the pressing challenges of their times. They learned how to capitalize on the media and connect with millions of people around the world.
Activists need to find a way to educate the public about a problem, right? Because that's the first thing in terms of dismantling any kind of oppressive power structure, is activists need to let people know what the problems are.
Now, in the past, before the digital era, you had to do that either in one-to-one conversations and knocking on doors, doing it on Sundays and from the pulpit in your church, perhaps, on TV, radio, and of course today, there's much more access for leaders to be communicating with multitudes of people through social media platforms.
With the wide reach of social media we have now, how much power and how many more followers would have been given to the causes of these three individuals? What if Nelson Mandela was able to secretly tweet from his prison cell? Or if a meme of Princess Diana shaking hands with an AIDS patient could have reached billions of cell phones and different platforms around the world? Or if Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech went viral on YouTube? But even without social media, these three figures managed to change people's lives forever. And despite their deaths, their actions and values still resonate today, making them part of history's ultimate influencers.